Hello, Terry White here, and happy to give you a first look at Photoshop on the iPad. That's right, it just got released. And while it is still a 1.0 version, I thought I would still go pretty deep and show you guys what's possible and what it can do. Of course, there'll be many videos about this going forward. The team's committed to adding features as quickly as possible, so this will be the first of many. But let's go ahead and dive right into what you can do today. So Photoshop on the iPad, you can download it. It is part of your Creative Cloud plan. If you already have Photoshop in your plan, you already have access to it. But I'm going to go ahead and launch it right now and start taking you through the interface. So the first thing you'll notice is that you get a home screen very similar to the home screen that you get on today's Adobe's desktop apps and of course the rest of the mobile apps. On the left-hand side, I've got the home button, which takes me here. I've got on this home screen, I've got the ability to start a new image right there, prominent at the top left. And then over here, I've got the ability to suggest a feature. So if there's something that you want to see going forward, go ahead and suggest a feature right here. And that helps the team prioritize what they're going to work on next. Then I've got my recent documents that I've been working on, as well as if I go to the left here, I've got the ability to tap Learn to watch other videos about Photoshop on the iPad. I've got the My Work, which is Cloud Docs, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. But that's not just showing what I've done on Photoshop on the iPad. That's just showing what I've saved from Photoshop, period, in my Cloud Docs, which makes them accessible here on the iPad as well. And then, of course, delete it. Down in the lower left-hand corner, I've got this button that says Create New, and I've got a button that says Import and Open. So just like on Photoshop on the desktop, Create New creates a blank document. You have your different presets for print, screen, film, and video, or of course you can go in and customize it and make it whatever you want. So if I wanted an 11 by 14, I can just tap 11, go here, make it 14, set the resolution to whatever I want, click Create, and that will give me 11 by 14 at 300 pixels per inch, ready to go. Resolution's not a problem. I've opened up files as big as 5 gigs with hundreds of layers, so don't worry about, oh, am I creating something that's too big? Chances are you're not, but just know that you can, depending on your hardware, you could run into some issues with performance if you're not on one of the later iPads. Okay, so let's go ahead and instead of creating something new, I'm going to go ahead and import a document, which is what many of you will do. You will import a photo that you already have or you just took. Now I get 3 choices when I do this: from the camera roll, self-explanatory, whatever's on my iPad right now. Files, which is what I love because that gives me the ability to access the iOS Files app, which many applications can tie into. So that lets me get pictures from my Dropbox, Google Drive, or other applications that may be storing images that I want. That's where I'm going to go. And then last but not least is camera, which if you want to hold up your iPad and take a picture with your camera, you could do that as well. But I'm going to go to Files, and that'll take me to the folder that we're going to work on today. But if I were to bounce out of that folder, just go back a couple levels, all the way back, it'll show me the locations. And again, any app that you have installed that works with Files will show up here, and any documents that are compatible with Photoshop, meaning images, you'd be able to open them right here. So I'm going to use my Creative Cloud files, the storage that I get with Creative Cloud, to access the images that I want. So I'm going to go down to Demo, scroll up to a folder I've got called Photoshop on the iPad or PS on the iPad, and then we're going to go into the one called Live on the Moon. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start off with the sky that I want. Let's go ahead and import that image, and we'll talk a little bit about the interface as we bring that image in. And brings it in, and it looks a lot like Photoshop. On the left-hand side, I see tools. And of course, we expect that tool panel to keep growing, to get more and more tools there. But those are the tools I have in this 1.0 version. And before I move any further, if you tap on a tool, more than likely that tool has a touch modifier. So this touch modifier is this icon, this little circle, which by the way, you can move around. You can put this anywhere you want on the screen, but it defaults to the lower left. Now, on the move tool, for example, if I just hold it down, that works with a constraint, meaning if I'm going to move an object move it up, down, left, or right, but don't let me move it around on the screen if I'm holding that down. And you'll notice that there's a small circle inside of a larger circle. So if I swipe my thumb to the outer edge, then that becomes duplicate. So let me show you how that would work. I'm gonna go ahead and bring in my next image. And let's go ahead and bring in the home image. And let's go say done. And at this point, if I were to hold down the modifier and move it, it will not, well, let's be on the move tool first of all. If I hold down the modifier and move it, there we go. It constrains my movement. So it's not letting me move it left or right. It's only letting me move it up or down because that's the motion I started with. If I move it left or right, won't let me move it up or down because that's the motion I started with. So the move tool's constrained that way. Now, if I hold down that same modifier and swipe out a little, it's where I get the bigger white circle. Now I'm duplicating. So as many times as I drag that, I am duplicating it on the screen. So the touch modifier, think of it, since a lot of people won't necessarily be using their iPad with a keyboard, you'll think about that as like on the keyboard, you might hold on your Option key or your Shift key or a modifier. The touch modifier is allowing you to not have to do that if you don't have a keyboard. Now, keyboard shortcuts still work, and we're going to get to those in a minute, but let's get rid of some of these extra images. So I have undo and redo in the upper right corner. I can just keep tapping. By the way, they're gestures. So if I hold down 2 fingers and just tap on the canvas, that's also undo. So I can undo that all the way until it's gone. Now let's go ahead and bring it right back in, or more importantly, I could do 3-finger tap to redo to bring it right back. So rather than importing it again. What if you didn't know what the gestures were? What if you don't know what the keyboard shortcuts are? What if you don't know any of this because you're just starting out? Well, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a question mark, and that question mark can view your gestures, your touch shortcuts, your keyboard shortcuts, so forth and so on. There's also a bonus trick. If you do have a keyboard attached, I'm using the Apple Folio keyboard right now, the smart keyboard that's attached to the iPad as a cover. But if I hold down the Command key on my keyboard and count to 3, that will also pop up a quick on-screen reminder of what my keyboard shortcuts are. So I get the ability to do it that way as well. All right, next up, we got our second image in. It created a layer. So on the layers panel here, I see 2 little squares. Wait, I'm used to bigger layers. Well, you notice on the right-hand side, you have different displays or different buttons for what your layers will look like. So I can hide the layers, bring the layers out as little icons, or make the layers fully expand. You can also pinch the layer panel to swipe it or pinch it down or pinch it out, depending on what you want to look at. All right, so now I got that second layer in. Again, I got more tools on the left-hand side. Let's go to a selection tool just for a second. If I were to use a selection tool now, I would be able to go in and make a selection, but you notice that popped out another panel. That's giving me the choices for that particular tool. So that's a lasso tool, so it gives me add to the selection by default, subtract from the selection, and an intersection of the selection as well. And if I tap the little menu at the bottom, that's where I can get to the feathering. So you have more controls over how that tool is going to work just by bringing out that modifier, or those options. Now, if I go in and make a selection, then you'll notice I get more options on the bottom because those are the options for the active selection. So everything's context sensitive, not showing you a bunch of things on screen unless you need to see them. So not showing me this all the time because I don't have a selection all the time. So there's deselect, mask, erase, invert, and more. So we'll get to more in a few minutes, but transform selection and of course similar, select similar. So a lot may look like it's not there, but some of it is just in the interface that's only exposed when it needs to be. So now, I could hit deselect, and I would do that if I didn't have a keyboard. But on the desktop, if I were using my Mac, I know Command D is deselect. And so a lot of times I do things instinctively because they work the same. So Command D on a Mac, Command D on the iPad. Works the same way if you have a keyboard. If not, just hit the deselect button. Okay, next up, we're going to go ahead and switch to a different tool. Just like on the desktop, if the tool has a little triangle in the lower left-hand corner, that means you can double tap to see the rest of the tools or press and hold. So I have a quick select tool here. And I could make my selection, but before we make the selection, as in every version of Photoshop, there are multiple ways to do the same thing. So there are techniques and methods and so forth and so on. So before we get too far into this, I got to get this image really ready. So let's go back to transform. Let's go now. Transform gives me, this is what the mode it came in, and I kind of hit done to show you the duplicate. But transform is the mode it came in, and you'll notice in the upper right corner, I've got the ability to flip it horizontally or vertically. And at the bottom, I've got a little handle where I could rotate it. So I can do that as well. And of course, if I start scaling it, it scales it from that corner using constraints. And let's undo that one last time. And if I want to constrain it from the center out on the Mac, that'd be holding down the Option key. I use my touch modifier, out, and now it will constrain from the center and scale out proportionally. So you've got the same kind of free transform that you would use on the desktop. The only thing that's a little bit different is you're not used to it being a tool, because in the past you would just hit Command T and it would bring up free transform. Now you have an actual tool for transform. All right, so I'm done with my transforms right now. And next thing I want to do is I want to experiment with blending modes. Now, I could accomplish this with a blending mode to get the look that I want, to see the sky through the image, but I'm going to show you two methods and use whichever one you want, because there are multiple ways to do the same thing. So let's go in, let's take a look at those blending modes. I'm going to go down to this third icon on the right-hand side, which will give me my layer properties, including blend modes. And if I go to blend modes, you get all your favorites here, all the ones you're used to. They give you a little visual icon to kind of show new people what that might look like. I already know I want multiply. Or actually, no, I don't want multiply, I want overlay. Overlay will give me the look that I'm looking for. And of course, all of this is non-destructive. And you can play with the opacity for the layer, as well as other effects and other things for the layer itself. We'll get to some of that as well. So I could use a blend mode, and that will give me the look that I want, but I'm going to go ahead and undo that because I'm going to do a different method. I'm going to use a selection method and a mask. So we're going to use quick select and just select a little bit of the sky. Not that much, just a little bit. There we go. Because there's sky interspersed in the trees. So I can't just select it as easily because it's not all contiguous. It may not do it right, but the sky is pretty much all white. It's all the same color. So if I go down to my selection menu at the bottom and say select similar, that'll select all the white, including some on the building, but that's okay. And now I have the ability to, if I hit mask, that's probably going to mask the wrong thing. So let's go ahead and invert the selection. So there's an invert button at the bottom as well. And I can then apply my mask and it will mask out all the white. So that's giving me a beautiful sky, but it kind of wrecked the house a little bit. But keep in mind, it's a mask. So on the little square icons on the layers here, I can swipe left and right to get between the mask and the pixels. I'm going to stick to the mask because I can now go to my paintbrush and I can go in and say, you know what, I want to mask out some of that effect. And I can go in and add more sky. In my case, I want to do the opposite, so I want to paint with white. And you also have the option of using pressure for opacity or use pressure for size. I'm going to turn off the opacity right now because I just want to paint. Now my brush is way too small, so I can just go ahead, hold down, and scrub my brush to whatever size I want using that options panel. So now I can go ahead and brush back in, masking that part of the house that was being covered. And bring all that back in that should be there. Some of that roof got a little wiped out because it was white or close enough. And there we go. Now we got our house back. Okay, great. Now I can, I love the way the sky looks, but the foreground is still too bright. So I'm going to swipe over to the right because now I want to work with the pixels. And then on the desktop, I would add an exposure adjustment layer that only affects the house, not the sky. That's called a clipped adjustment. You've got the same capability under the menu on the right-hand side in Photoshop on the iPad. So just add a clipped adjustment. We're going to go ahead and add an exposure adjustment, and we're going to bring down the exposure of the foreground or that layer quite a bit. And that will give me kind of that, hey, it is evening time. It's not midday with a starry sky. All right, so I'm going to just collapse that down, just pinch it down. And now I can go ahead and talk about my next image that I want to bring in. So let's go ahead and go into the image import button, because you don't have a file place, you don't have a file menu at all. So import has got its own button, just like free transform has its own button. So now let's go ahead and bring in from files. Oh, and before I do that, let me point out that you get a fourth option once you're inside the document. When we were outside the document creating it from scratch or importing the first one, we only got camera roll, files, and camera. Now we have camera roll, files, libraries, and cameras, because just like on the desktop, once you're in a document, you can import things from or use your libraries panel and drag things over. Or in this case, I can use the libraries and import things in from my Creative Cloud libraries. But we're going to go back to files, which is where I have the moon. We'll put the moon in, and again, I've got all my free transform options: perspective, distort, menu for more things, rotation angle, all of that's here. But I'm just going to bring it in the way it is. And now I'm going to use the quick select tool once again to make a selection of the moon itself. So we'll just go in, quickly make that selection of the moon, and then we'll go ahead and I think I want to invert that selection and mask it again. Oh, that was the opposite. This time I do want it to be selected and do the mask. I'm dyslexic when it comes to masking. All right, so there we go. We've got it there, it's masked, but I want to cut out a huge section of it. I want it to look like a partial moon or half moon or quarter moon. So to do that, I'm going to switch over to the elliptical marquee. And I want to make a selection from the center. So again, if I were on a desktop, Option, Shift, perfect circle from the center. But in this case, I'm just going to use the touch modifier. I can hold down the modifier and that will select a constraint. So that's like holding down the Shift. If I swipe out to the outer edge, then that's doing constrain from the center. And I'm not going to be perfect on the center, but I'm going to get as close as I can. And that will give me a perfect circle from the center out. Now that I've done that, I can move it wherever I want, because it is just a selection at this point. So I'll get it right there. Now I've made my selection. Let me undo that. I want it to be a little bigger. Try it one more time. There we go. There we go. Now I'll move it out. All right. So now I got my selection made. I want to fill that selection with black because I'm already on the mask. I just want to mask out more of the moon. I masked out the white part of the background. Now I want to mask out the moon itself. So I'm going to switch to black, my foreground color. And you notice I swipe the foreground and background color up and down. That's how you switch between them. Or if you have a keyboard, the letter X works just like it does on a desktop. Now that I got black as my foreground color, we'll go ahead and do a fill bucket. And we'll just fill the mask with black. And it adds that black in. All right, so now there's a little bit of white left around that edge for some reason. I'm going to deselect. I'm going to come in with a black paintbrush, and we're just going to go ahead and mask out that little bit of white edge that's there. So all non-destructive. Okay, so now we're going to free transform it. I go to free transform tool, free transform it down, rotate it a bit, and put it in the sky about where I want it. I'm going to make it a little smaller. Go right about there. All right. So now I got that in place. The next thing we're going to do, I think I cut a little too much of my moon out. Again, it is a mask. I can mask it back in, but we're just going to keep going for now. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and import my next image, which is going to be a ladder to get to the moon. Let's go to the files, bring into my ladder. I'm getting all this from stock, by the way, Adobe stock. And same thing, once I'm done with bringing that in, I can then go to my quick select tool. There we go, quick select. Make a selection and just say select similar to get all of that and mask it. There we go. So now that I got my mask done there, we'll go back to free transform and now I can better scale it and get it where I want it to be. Still a little too tall. Bring that down. Now, same thing, the ladder, just like the foreground of the original image, is too bright. So once again, I'm on the ladder layer. I will add another clipped adjustment and we'll add another exposure adjustment and we'll just bring the exposure down of that ladder just a bit, just to darken it so we still see the ladder, but it doesn't look like it's bright middle of the day. All right, pinch that down. And last but not least, we got one more image to bring in. And we'll go to Files. We'll bring in the other house, that one. And we're done with the adjustments, or we're done with the transform at that point. Now, the next thing we want to do is another quick select. We'll select just the house, or much of the house. And the problem is also selecting some of the windows. So some of the things I'll do, like I'll go to subtract mode now, and I'll just start subtracting the windows out of it. And I would normally zoom in, take my time, do a better job, but I'm just going to do this down and dirty quick just for you today. If I got too much, I can go to add back in that middle part, go back to subtract. Oop, didn't mean to move it. There we go. Go back to subtract. There we go. And subtract that a little bit more. All right, just trying to get some of that original sky out of there. There we go. Okay, close enough for now. Last thing we'll do, make some subtractions there. A little overzealous. A little overzealous on the tool, and that's okay for what we're doing right now. It really won't matter because it's going to be so tiny. All right. If that still is not, like, in other words, if you're fighting with the tool, keep in mind, undo, 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 undo. You don't have to use the quick select tool for everything. You still have your lasso, which also works in a additive or subtractive mode. So I could go in and just subtract that out myself. I think I could do a better job. Maybe not. And if you still don't get it just right, remember it's going to be a mask, so you'll be able to paint it back in the way you want as well. All right, so now let me do one more. We're going to subtract. Let me just subtract some of that from the bottom. There we go, and add it back in, just a little bit I want there. Okay, perfect. All right, so now, let me zoom down. And same thing, we're going to invert and add a mask. In that case, I wanted the opposite. This is what I mean by being dyslexic about the masking. Undo. Thank God we have undos. And mask. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. All right, next up. Now, what I meant by the painting the mask back in, that actually did better than I thought it would. But let's say we wanted to paint some of that back in. We could, because you have a brush. So you can either hide some of it with the paintbrush if you needed to. So if you still saw some white that you didn't want, you can just go ahead and mask it out. A little easier than trying to finesse the selection, because all of this is non-destructive. If you cut out too much, switch to white and paint it back in, like so, like so. All right, so again, you can fix that selection any way you want. But like I said, it's going to be so tiny, you're not going to know it anyway. So now let's go ahead and free transform this layer. And we're going to go ahead and scale it way down. Scale it. If I can grab the handle. There we go. Scale it, scale it, scale it, way, way down. And right now, it's where I want it to be on the moon, but it's in front of everything else. So we're going to say done. And if I go to that layer, I can see it. And I go to my moon layer, I can see it. I want that layer all the way down below the moon layer. Now, on the iPad, a lot of times you have to hold something down for a second or two because it doesn't know if you're trying, because it's a touch interface, it doesn't know if you're trying to select it or select and move it. So, or select and drag it. So in this case, I'm going to hold and count to 2. 1, 2. Now I can move it. All right, and that puts it behind the moon. All right, last but not least, I said that before, but last but not least, this time for real, we're going to do two things. We're going to add some text, because a lot of these demos, you never see people do anything with text. And we're going to talk about fonts, but we're also going to do one more big thing at the end. So let's go to my type tool, and let's do text here. And I'm going to just type the words live on the, and then we'll say done. And I'll go to my type tool one more time. And we're going to just say moon. So two separate text layers. Now the first layer we'll go back to, let's get out of this layer. There we go. Go back to that layer, double tap, triple tap to select all. We can change our color. And I want some of that moon color because it's a nice gray. So I just tap the eyedropper, move it over to the moon, and get some of that nice gray for it. Okay, next up, I want to go to the other layer, and same thing. Go to my type, and I don't know what I want yet, but let's say I want something in the family of that color. Not sure if I want that yet. But anyway, I got both layers now set the way I want. The only thing I don't like is the fonts. So I want to use a different font for the live on the versus moon. Now, if I were to go back to the live on the layer, we can see that layer now with the words in it. If I go back to that layer and select it, I don't have to select it, but I get the ability to choose a font. But what if the font you want is not here? Because you're only going to get a certain set number of default fonts built into the app. I might try that. That looks pretty cool, but it's not what I really wanted. And of course, we want what we really want. Now, let me do one more thing real quick. Let me go back to the properties for that. And I just want to point out that you don't have to necessarily select it to change the font. So just selecting the layer will get it done. All right, but let's say I want a different font. The fonts you have installed are what's on your iPad. So in this case, those are the fonts on my iPad that I can use. But Adobe makes thousands of fonts. And this week also with the ability to use Photoshop on the iPad, we introduced the ability to use the Creative Cloud app to install whatever fonts you want from Creative Cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swipe out of this, go to my Creative Cloud app. I see my installed fonts, but I also see the ability to browse Adobe fonts where I can browse thousands and thousands and thousands of fonts. But that's fine, but I've already installed a good deal of fonts on my computer, on my Mac. I just want to use some of the ones I'm already using. So if I go to activate fonts on this, active fonts not on this device, you see there are 485 fonts. Those are the 485 fonts I'm normally using. Not all at once, but normally. So let's go ahead and tap those. And now we'll see all the fonts that I have at one point or another installed that I can now choose to use or install on this iPad. So ACM Pro or Acumen Pro, whatever that is, I'm going to go ahead and install that one. It will download the font and it's now installed. So now remember, I was Acumen Pro, swipe back over to Photoshop, and once I'm in Photoshop, go back to that document, it loads up, go back to that layer, which I want to go back to the Live on the Moon layer. I don't know what that layer got added by accident because I was in the type tool, so let's go ahead and delete the layer. There we go. Go back to the Live on the Moon layer, go back to the properties, and go to the fonts, and scroll up, and there's my ACM Pro. So I've got the ability to use a font that wasn't on my iPad a few minutes ago, use any style of that font that I want, including italic, light, bold, whatever that font comes with, and that ultra black thin, that's what I really want. There we go. I have a nice thin for that font, including the ability to change its size, make it nice and big. There we go, Live on the Moon. And then I can go to my Moon layer, and there's another Adobe font that I've already installed called Fat Frank. There it is. And I can now make that font or that type just as big as I want it to be. So I said there were two things. Fonts was one. Now here's the last thing. Everything we've been doing to this document has been getting not only saved, so even when I switched apps, it just said, oh, you're not in Photoshop anymore. I'm going to go ahead and close this for you. It not only saved it, but if I have an internet connection, it synced it as part of my cloud documents. Cloud documents are also new as a Photoshop and Fresco and all of the mobile apps that have a desktop counterpart as well. Cloud Docs is going to be one of the ways you're going to work between screens, between systems. So here I have Photoshop on my desktop. If I wanted to continue working on that file that I made on the iPad, or vice versa, if I start a file on my desktop and I want to work on it on the iPad, I have the ability for the first time now to not only, here, let me show you saving one. So let's open up one of these. Here's a stock image. If I want to work on that stock image on the iPad, I have the ability to save as, and now I have the option to save to Cloud Docs or save it to my computer. You were always saving it to your computer before. Now you have the option to do it in either place or both. So I can save it to Cloud Docs, and therefore it would be in that Cloud Docs or that Cloud Documents section of Photoshop on the iPad. But anyway, let's go ahead and close this one, because what I really want to do is work on what we just saw. So I'm going to go to Open, and now I have the option to open Cloud Docs. So when I say Open Cloud Docs, that looks familiar. There it is. So I have the ability to sync that file down intact with all its layers. Everything's ready to go. All the fonts, all the masks, all the effects, anything I would have done to it, and I can keep working back and forth. So there it is. Photoshop on the iPad, working hand in hand with Photoshop on the desktop. And things you do on the desktop, even if they're not currently supported, meaning from an editing standpoint on the iPad, would still exist on the iPad. So if I add filters I don't have on the iPad, if I do smart objects or all kinds of things that aren't there yet, they would still open. I just wouldn't be able to edit them on the iPad, but they would still be intact. I'd still be able to move the layers around, so forth and so on. So one last thing. I know I lied. One more last thing. Let's go back to Photoshop on the iPad one more time, because I didn't talk about this one extra thing here, and that is if I wanted to create a little bit more depth of field with my sky, it just looks so perfect. But I have the ability to go in to my filter menu and use Gaussian blur. So I can create a blur effect so that the stars just aren't so perfectly defined as they would be off in the distance. So I could duplicate that, add a blending mode, add a blur to one of those, and have some of them blurred, some of them not. So there you have it. Photoshop on the iPad, a complete round trippable workflow, and not all the tools yet, not all the abilities yet, but a darn good start. So with that said, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye, everybody.